Hi friend, I'm back for another edition of Read Alouds. Today we're going to read The Moon Book by Gail Gibbons. This is a fantastic book. Gail Gibbons is one of my favorite authors. She writes really good science books. They're books that you can learn from, and she's got some cool drawings and diagrams, and they're just really fun. So I'm going to read this to you so you can see the pictures. So I am going to tweak this and turn it around so you guys can see the pictures better. So hopefully the setup works. Cross your fingers. Ready? Here we go. There's my house. There's our book. How's that? Can we see it pretty good there? Okay. As the sun sets at the end of each day, the sky becomes darker and darker. On many clear nights, our moon shines brightly in the night sky. So if we look right here, we've got our moon and our day. Okay. The moon makes no light of its own to shine. It's bright in the night sky because it reflects the sun's light. It's about 1/4 the size of Earth. It's made up of rock and dust, and there is no air or sign of life. So there's Earth. It's about 8,000 miles in diameter. That's all the way around. Think of like a belt. Sorry, a diameter would be from one end to the other. And 25,000 miles around. When you're looking at it around, that's what it would be if you had a belt around it. The moon is about 2,000 miles in diameter and 6,800 miles around. Astronomers study the planets, their moons, and the stars. We've got some crashing, looks like. We've got a ring. An orbit is the path of one object around another. Excuse me. Most astronomers and other scientists think our moon formed about 4.5 billion years ago. Some believe something collided with Earth that tossed out a cloud of rock and debris. While orbiting around the Earth, the rock and debris came together to make the moon. Crash, stuff, moon. That makes sense, doesn't it? Well, in ancient times, people thought the moon was a powerful god or goddess. The Romans called their moon goddess Diana. In Greece, the moon goddess was Selene, who rode through the sky in a silver chariot. Some American Indian tribes believed the moon and sun were brother and sister gods. Stories and legends were told about the shapes and shadows that show on the moon's surface. Some people said the moon showed a man's face, the man on the moon, who was imprisoned for stealing. See how that looks like a face? Others told the moon of moon demons living there. So there's lots of different stories about the man on the moon. So ask your family about that, see what they think. The moon is Earth's only natural satellite. It takes about 1 month for the moon to travel around the Earth. So it says here a satellite is an object that orbits around another larger one. So our moon goes around the Earth, okay? And that is why we have different phases of the moon. That's why the moon changes. The moon makes one complete rotation for each trip around the Earth. Thus, the same side of the moon is always facing the Earth. So that's what these little arrows mean, is the same part of the moon is always facing, but it all depends on the sunlight as to how much of the moon we actually see. The moon appears to change shape, but it doesn't. The different shapes we see are called phases of the moon. We're seeing different amounts of light being reflected on the moon. How much light we see depends on the position of the Earth, moon, and the sun. Okay, so that gives you a little diagram about why we see different pieces. Now we're going to actually learn about the different phases. Okay, so here, during a new moon, the moon is almost directly between the sun and the Earth. So the moon looks dark, and we don't see anything. So see right there on that piece, it's all shaded. That's the new moon. We don't see any of the moon at all. And a crescent moon, the moon is waxing when the surface we see gets bigger. In a few days, bits of the sun side of the moon shows, and it forms a crescent. So this is kind of where we are now. We're in a waxing phase. So remember, waxing means it gets bigger. We're going to see more of the light. So we're in the crescent moon phase now, headed towards the first quarter moon. When the moon is a quarter of the way around Earth, it's in the first quarter phase. We see it as half lit, and it's sometimes called a half moon. Okay, so it looks like half a moon, but we call it the quarter moon because of all the other phases we will see about now. Then we have a gibbous moon. When the moon is waxing between the first quarter moon and a full moon, it's called a gibbous moon. So again, between half and a full is called a gibbous. About 2 weeks have passed now since our new moon. Now the entire face of the moon we see shines. We can see the whole thing now. And that's usually when my kiddos start to lose their minds. Gibbous. So now the moon is waning when the lit surface we see is getting smaller. So remember, waxing is when more light is coming. We see more of the light. Waning is where we had the full light, and now we're starting to see a little less each day. When the moon is waning between a full moon and the last quarter moon, it's a gibbous moon once again. So it started as a gibbous moon when it was waxing, and it goes to a gibbous moon as it's waning. And then we have our last quarter moon. When the moon is 3/4 of the way around Earth, it's in the last quarter phase. Again, we see it as half lit, and it's sometimes called a half moon. But notice that this time, it's the left part we see. When it was waxing, we saw the right-hand side. Then we see a crescent moon again, a small silver moon shining in the sky. But again, it's on the opposite side. And then we have the new moon. Takes the moon about 1 month to go through its entire set of phases. People used to know the time of the month by watching the moon's phase. Very cool, because we didn't always have clocks to tell time, so people used to be able to tell time with the sun and the moon. Okay, so here we have a solar eclipse. Here, the moon's orbit around the Earth is usually tilted slightly compared to the Earth's orbit around the sun. Because of this, the moon cannot exactly line up between the sun and the Earth. But when the moon's orbit is not tilted, and the moon lines up exactly between the sun and Earth, a solar eclipse happens. Okay, so that's showing you what it means. A solar eclipse is simply this, where it blocks out and you can see the sun behind the moon. Solar eclipse project. Here's how to make one. So if this comes up in the next couple months, which I don't know if it will, this tells you how to make a project that you can see. So it says, warning, never look directly at a solar eclipse because the sun rays can hurt your eyes. And we really don't want that to happen. We don't want to hurt our eyeballs. So what you do is you poke a pin in the middle of a piece of paper. It could be like cardstock or a piece of cardboard. And you're going to stand with your back to the sun. Remember, you don't want to look at the sun. So what you're going to do is then you have another piece of paper in your hand, and that acts like a screen. So you're going to move papers. So what's going to happen is this piece of paper here with the hole is going to get this solar eclipse. It's going to go whoosh through that hole, and it's going to project it right down here. So that's what you're going to make it. That's how you'll see the eclipse. The moon shadow falls on Earth, and a solar eclipse can last up to 7.5 minutes. And then we can also have a lunar eclipse. So when the sun, the Earth, and the moon are all exactly lined up, a lunar eclipse happens. Just like in a solar eclipse, the moon's orbit is not tilted. The Earth blocks the sunlight that usually lights up the moon, and the moon gets a reddish glow. So you can see that there. Lunar comes from luna, the Latin word for moon. A lunar eclipse can last up to 3.5 hours. There we go. You can see that it's red. The moon affects the oceans too. The moon's pull, called gravity, on the oceans is strong enough to cause tides. Tides are the daily raising and falling of the ocean's waters. So high tide happens every 13 hours. That's where the tide goes up. And low tide happens every 13 hours. That's when the water goes down. This is because the moon takes about 25 hours to come back to the same place in the sky as it was the night before. So tides, the differences vary around the world. Some of the night sky gazers and astronomers can get a close-up view of the moon by looking through binoculars. Others look through telescopes. There are some huge telescopes that others use at observatories. So this is a big fancy building, and they have a super strong telescope that's part of their building that they use to look at the sky. A close-up view of the moon's surface shows dark patches astronomers call plains or seas. Other areas covered with craters, mountains, and valleys. The moon's craters were formed between 3.5 and 4.5 billion years ago when meteors pounded its surface. So remember, we just learned about meteors, so they went boom, 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 and they hit it, and that's why they make those craters. For centuries, people have wanted to know more about the moon. In 1959, the Soviet spacecraft Luna 3 transmitted to Earth the first pictures of the far side, or back, of the moon. There's not as many dark areas on that side as we see from Earth. So there's your front and there's your back. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy made a commitment to put Americans on the moon before the end of the decade. At first, many American unmanned spacecraft were sent. Pictures were taken. Then Surveyor 1 landed on the moon in 1966. It sent back information about the moon's surface. The first manned orbit of the moon was made by the Apollo 8 astronauts in 1968. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin of the Apollo 11 mission became the first men to walk on the moon. Could you imagine how cool that would be, to be the first person to walk on the moon? Well, there were 5 more Apollo landings on the moon, and the last one, Apollo 17, was in 1972. The astronauts did experiments and gathered samples. Astronomers and other scientists were able to learn more about the history of nature of our moon. So they got lots of really cool information. On a clear, still night when the moon is in the sky, gaze up at it. We're still learning more about our closest neighbor, the moon. Here we have him right there. And then here we have some milestones. I'm going to try and zoom in on this. So this just shows you some of our dates that have happened. So if you want to pause that, you can look at all that. And then we have different moon legends and some different stories all about the moon. And then some more fun facts about the moon. Okay. So friends, I know this was a very long video. This is a really good book. I love all the information in there. So I hope you enjoyed reading it with me, and I hope you enjoyed learning more about the moon. Till next time, bye friends.